Good day and welcome to the Lillyroddyshow, coming to you from the LRS studios here in Houston, Texas. So glad to have you join me today as we look at the week of June 28th through July 4th. Last week, of course, I started our new show format, and I hope you will continue to enjoy it. I'll not be doing the daily forecast as I had been before, but I'll be talking about more specific things in astrology and how they affect us. You still can get my daily forecast by finding me on Lillyroddyshow.com or on Twitter or Facebook. You can always contact me at my email address, Lillyroddyshow@AOL.com. Be sure and subscribe to our show on our YouTube page so you'll get a notice about our show in your email. And of course, I have to mention the weather. Here in Houston, the forecast from now until November will be hot and muggy, with an occasional chance for rain or tropical storm. And of course, in the mornings, it has just gotten to be so much warmer and humid. That just makes it all so much special when I walk. Just this morning, it was 80 degrees at 7 a.m. So that should tell you how hot things are going to be. We're really going to have a lot more heat through particularly over the next month or so in the USA generally. Well, let's take a brief look at what's happening for next week, Sunday, July 28th through July 4th on Saturday. On Tuesday, the 30th, we have a fairly long void moon from 1:18 p.m. on Tuesday until Wednesday, July 1st at 4:11. Essentially, the latter part of the day on Tuesday, the 30th, will be under the void moon. We should be able to do very well, and it doesn't really affect us on Wednesday. There's a whole lot of energy this month of July, but we may drag our feet as we get started. We also have a full moon in Capricorn on July 1st at 9 degrees of Capricorn. This will certainly make all of us more conscious about our long-term security and the long-term security of our country. This week is overall much smoother really than the last 6 weeks, so we should be able to get a lot more things done. With July 4th being the USA birthday, I thought it would be interesting to talk about the USA chart and what's going on for the USA. For those that want to follow, I am using the USA Sibley chart, and the information for that, of course, is July 4th, 1776. The time I use is 5:10 p.m., and that's in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I do prefer this chart over the other charts out there. I have used them, but I've been working with this chart for several years, and I find that the timing piece of it seems to work very well. Now, the USA chart has a really strong Sun-Saturn square natally. We essentially have the Sun in Cancer in the 8th house, at 13 degrees of Cancer, and we have Saturn in Libra in the 10th house at 14 degrees. So we have a very tight Sun-Saturn square. And of course you can see with our Sun in the 8th house, just our chart, how much the whole idea of money and capitalism certainly come from that 8th house Sun. And then we have a strong 10th house Saturn, which is a lot about people, the notion of people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and making something of their life. This is all part of our Saturn in Libra in the 10th house. Now, in the sky, we've had two planets lined up for quite a while, actually. One is Uranus and one is Pluto. Uranus is moving through Aries, and Pluto is moving through Capricorn. Uranus and Pluto are squaring each other, and both of these planets have been hitting the USA chart. And for us in the USA, this really all started in 2008 when the Uranus-Pluto square made contact with our 3-degree Venus in Cancer. And if you remember, of course, that's when we started experiencing sort of our economy crashing 2008, 2009. Now, currently, Uranus is squaring our Sun and opposing our Saturn, and Pluto is opposing our Sun and squaring our Saturn. So what that does, let me say that again, so make sure I said it correctly. Uranus is squaring our Sun and opposing our Saturn, and Pluto is opposing our Sun and squaring our Saturn. So what's happening in the USA chart is that we have this huge transiting grand cross that's affecting our Sun, our ego, our definition, who our country is, and Saturn, which is the representation of structure, responsibility, authority figures. Now, because of the transiting Uranus and Pluto, these are really the core of the problems that we've seen in our own country with the infighting of our elected officials. The USA will finally, thank goodness, come out of this very difficult transit, but not until after April of 2016. At that point, we should slowly begin to heal as a nation. Now, this week, Mars and the Sun both enter Cancer and will be making contact with our 4 natal planets in Cancer. We have the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter all in Cancer. And the Sun and Mars will be making contact with all these planets over the next 3 to 4 weeks. At this particular taping, we are still waiting on the Supreme Court to make a decision on same-sex marriage. And that should happen within the next day or so. I have written about the USA legalizing same-sex marriage in 2008 when Pluto did enter Capricorn. The reason I'd come to this conclusion was that when Pluto was in Libra in the late 60s and early 70s, the divorce laws over the planet changed. And with Pluto essentially squaring its position in Libra currently, I knew that those marriage and divorce laws would be changed and expanded. I have mentioned this fact before, that when Pluto was in Capricorn, 2 cycles before, approximately 500 years ago, Henry VIII was in power in England, and he was trying to change the divorce laws in England because of the Catholic Church. And of course, we all know the history. England split from the Catholic Church and started the Anglican Church. And of course, this whole time period, about approximately 500 years ago, this was the time of Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. So you can see just by the fact that Pluto moving through Capricorn, there were big changes in the power brokers, much like we're experiencing now. The last cycle, approximately 250 years ago when Pluto was in Capricorn, was actually the very beginning of the American Revolution and ultimately the birth of our country. So even then, there were big changes in terms of governments and power brokers over the whole planet. We just weren't as aware of them in 1776 because the internet was really slow then. Now, with the USA moving through, with Mars moving through the USA chart, we can expect our country over the next 40 days or so to be more proactive and even more warrior-like. The USA does have Mars natally at 21 Gemini in the 7th house of the USA chart. And Mars right now is not only had made contact with our natal Mars, we did our Mars return, but Mars is also out of bounds which adds an extra intensity to that Mars. And we can easily see how much violence there has been in our country, especially over race relationships. Now, other things had happened as well with this Mars transit. This is when China supposedly broke in and took all the personal records of, I forget how many millions of people that they have worked in the government, 14 million people, some unbelievable number. That all happened when Mars was moving through Gemini during our Mars return. And as Mars moves into Cancer, one of the very first planets Mars is hitting, and that is currently happening right now, and that's Mars is hitting Venus in our chart, and that is the planet of relationships. And that's why we should hear something from the Supreme Court on the USA changing its same-sex marriage laws. And a side note to this whole time frame, in the past, when the USA was experiencing a lot of racial problems, was when Uranus and Pluto were conjunct in Virgo in the late 60s. And ultimately, that's my cat. You see how big a mouth he has. This is exactly the repeat of that planetary alignment that we're experiencing currently with the Uranus-Pluto square. So in the late 60s, Uranus and Pluto were conjunct, and now, you know, a little over 40 years later, Uranus and Pluto are now squaring each other. So with this alignment, and particularly because of the movement of Mars into Cancer, I think that, you know, that we should look for the USA to increase our troops overseas, or maybe to at least getting them ready for deployment. And as a country, we may feel much more defensive about our country and what other countries are doing to support or to harm us. And one other effect of Mars, which is not always so well seen, is that with Mars moving through the USA chart and hitting all of our Cancer planets, is this should really keep the summer temperatures up really high. So it's probably going to be a particularly hot, and probably in the middle part of our country, a much drier summer than we have experienced in the past. And eventually, we should see an increase in property values in the USA in terms of real estate, but that may not come until 2016. And essentially, our country has been going through a massive death and rebirth transit. We are no longer the shining example of the American dream. We will begin to rebuild our country and our fallen status as we get past April of next year, which is the very last Pluto-Uranus square. But as with all Pluto transits, it's time to clean out the rot. And with Uranus, it's time to move forward into the present and let freedom ring. Uranus is the planet of independence and freedom, and that is a big deal planet in the USA chart. So essentially, happy birthday to us all, and we'll have a much better year in 2016. I hope you enjoy your July 4th celebration honoring the birthday of America. And thank you for joining me this week, June 28th through July 4th. And please join me next week, July 5th through July 11th, as we examine the planetary effects on all of us. This is the Lilly Roddy Show, coming to you from the LRS studios here in Houston, Texas, and reminding you to keep those stars in your eyes. Bye-bye. Happy 4th of July.